Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, today we formally unveil the Nature Bank, the reimagined development bank for resilient prosperity. This institution is built for the realities our countries face: climate risk, uneven access to capital, and systems that too often reward reaction over resilience. By centering nature, data, and sovereignty capacity, the Nature Bank proposes a practical path to development that strengthens balance sheets and communities alike. I'm honored to welcome Dr. Jean Leon, its Executive Director, to share how this next generation multilateral can help countries, especially SIDS and other vulnerable economies, move from projects to durable prosperity. Dr. Leon, I've been with you for about 1 or 2 years, since maybe before or just after Abbas, the SIDS conference, SIDS 4 conference in Antigua and Barbuda. The first question that I have for you, Dr. Leon, is in one line: what is the Nature Bank and why now?
Thank you very much, and let me welcome all of you who are here in the audience. Maybe we should start with what is a bank, first and foremost. And a bank for me is a facilitator of wealth creation. Now, if we start from that definition, then I think I want to say why the name Nature Bank, as opposed to the original Development Bank for Resilient Prosperity. Nature Bank because nature is the new facilitator of wealth creation. And so it captures, in a sense, everything that the bank or a bank is about. Now, why would we say nature is the facilitator of wealth creation? We need to ask ourselves one question: what is the problem with wealth creation today? The problem with wealth creation today is that we have used, maybe abused, nature in the search of income, because we have falsely treated income as wealth. So when I say wealth creation, what we have been doing is creating income, but creating income at the cost of nature. So what we need to be able to do is to first now use what do we need to do to nature to continue to create wealth. And I think when I say the Nature Bank, we can see it as 3 dimensions. The first is, what is the definition of wealth? The definition of wealth says we need to move beyond income, beyond GDP, to a broader concept of wealth. As Ambassador has said, what we are calling resilient prosperity. Prosperity in its wider sense that talk about well-being, talk about equity, talk about income, talk about livelihoods in a sustainable, long-term way. So it has to be able to withstand shocks that occur. So therefore, we are talking here a definition of wealth that is different to income. The second is, it reminds us definitionally, you cannot continue to talk about wealth as an individual element. That is not the way nature operates. Nature always and has always operated as a system. And so while we have sought to use parts of nature, nature is now telling us the whole system is broken. And therefore, if there is one problem we could say the world faces, that problem is we have a nature degradation, nature declining problem. And to be able to fix that, we need to recognize you can only fix it by treating nature as a system. So definition-wise. The second is, how do we finance the things that we need to do? Again, we take the cue from nature. And what we are looking to say is, we have for too long treated nature as a resource that can be utilized. What we need to do is to flip that switch and say nature ought to be an asset that generates benefits, benefits that can be monetized. And therefore, that says we can unlock value that we have now as resources, but are not recognized as assets. So the unlocking of value, the unlocking of nature as a system to promote wealth creation, not in an income sense, but in a broader prosperity sense. The third element of this is capacity building. How do you continue to promote that particular development? It is again by learning from nature. Nature is an interconnected system. And everything that keeps and can sustain itself in nature does that only when the pieces are linked and they see their interconnections and they learn from each other. And that is the essence of what Sergio talked about, structured partnerships. Until we see that the only way we advance is through partnerships, by learning, by building capacity, and by undertaking, mimicking how nature evolves. And I can even think here, as I see Dr. Vin in the backdrop, agroforestry, mimicking nature as part of agricultural development is one way of building capacity and learning through partnerships. And with you in the room, it is not about governments. It is not about the private sector. It's not about family offices. It's not about philanthropies. It's not about civil society, but a joint responsibility of all working together, not in silos, but in mission-oriented national, regional, global goals as targets. All of those things that I've said are mimicked in nature. All of those are the principles on which the Nature Bank is built. And so when we talk of the Nature Bank, we are really saying wealth creation that mimics, learns, emulates nature. And in so doing, preserve nature, not only for today, but for prosperity going forward. For you, for your children, your grandchildren, and if I can go one step further, for civilization of the next millennia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Leon, for that startup, answering the startup question. The second question to you, and to dig a little bit more deeper, is what is structurally different from traditional MDBs, and what gap will you fill that others can't or won't?
So thank you for that, Ambassador. The gaps are clearly there. Where we are today, with massive inequities, global inequities, ecological degradation, a fractured multilateralism, declining lack in cohesion, social cohesion across the world. If the system was working the way it ought to work, we would have none of those. We would have none of those. It is clear that we have a major problem. And the major problem can be summarized as one: the cost of doing activity has been underestimated. And because it has been underestimated, the incentives for investments to flow in a sustainable direction has equally been misplaced. And so we have sought to produce things and led to ecological degradation, or we have sought return where we thought it was high, not because it was genuinely high, but because we were underestimating the attendant external costs. When we adopt a systems approach, which is our first major departure from other MDBs, and we recognize the planet as being land and ocean and atmosphere and biodiversity and biochemical composition of the soils, all in one integrated concept that needs to be preserved together, then we realize the way to solve the problem is to take the total cost of production into account. So that's our first major difference. The second is we are saying we cannot continue the way we have mobilized finance by either treating finance as a linear issue of monies for a specific project, but we need to see finance as an ecosystem that promotes an ecosystem of outcomes where there is interoperability among the providers of finance. And so we adhere to a multi-source, multi-instrument approach that blends sovereign, private, philanthropists, all in one. And by doing this, we are championing what is now in vogue, but at a different level. What does blended finance mean? Blended finance of whether you are a high risk, low risk, patient, non-patient, capital, sovereign, non-sovereign. It is about blending them, but not blending them linearly, blending them as a system. So again, that's the next point that we are very much looking to change. And the third is, I think, the structured partnerships, that we are very different to other MDBs because we see the symbiosis of all elements in productive capacity, from produced assets to human capital to societal capital, as necessary ingredients to advance not individual projects, but investment programs that see production as a chain, not the links of the chain that we have been following, but a complete chain. And by doing that, when we see a chain working together, the automatic thing that happens is we de-risk, because the risk of the individual parts go down, the return goes up, the investment incentives flow in the right direction, and we guarantee at the same time that we keep the planet alive and regenerative. So these are, Ambassador Free, I think, major differences in perspective that makes the Nature Bank very, very different from all other MDBs, but not in a sense of putting them aside. Let's be very clear. It is in the sense of plugging gaps that exist, narrowing inequities, increasing access to finance, creating ecological stability, and raising prosperity and well-being of people. And that is the gap we are looking to close. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Leon. Just the push on with our questions. The third question that I have for you is, how do the three pillars of nature, data, sovereignty work end-to-end in a real project? Where does the country ownership sit in the decision chain?
Well, I think we can see this as a process, Ambassador. The first is you need to understand whatever you're trying to do, and that means you need to be able to measure it. Measuring means I need data of all forms. I need concept. I need framework. That has to have the principles of verification to allow for certification. Once I can get to that first phase, then it means I have the bridge to building trust. Trust with investors who want to be able to allow financing to flow. The financing that flows allows for the execution. The execution can only take place if I have the capacity. And so it is linking all of those elements from concept through financing, through execution, through monitoring to get you to an outcome space that is a global systems outcome space. That is what makes the bank a systems bank, a nature bank, because we are mimicking what makes nature nature. That is the key point that we are trying to get to.
Thank you, Dr. Leon. How will you mobilize private and philanthropic capital without deepening debt? What specific instruments or risk-sharing tools come first?
Well, I think when we say deepening debt, debt is an outcome of revenues and expenditures. It's a financing element. What we are doing is we are moving from financing gaps to the accumulation of natural capital. So that automatically of its own right is debt reducing. Now that is not the same as saying there is no debt, because there will always be debt as long as you have to finance. But that debt, A, will be less because you have more resources, more capacity. That debt will be less because the fact that you have now engineered a systems approach, your risk is lower, so your requirements are less, and therefore less debt accumulation. And the third is the purpose of that debt is now linked to generating outcomes of success. And therefore, no matter how you look at those three elements, you are always going to have less debt. And the bringing in of the public and the private or philanthropic in one equally helps to reduce debt, because now you can blend and you can purpose and you can get to your outcomes at a lower cost. So all told, all around, it's a win-win for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Leon. We have a couple of minutes to complete our panel. The last question to you is, by the next UNGA, what three milestones will prove the Nature Bank is real and scaling, and how can partners here engage next week to help hit them?
Yeah, I think let's maybe answer that by saying, what exactly will the Nature Bank be? It's a multilateral, treaty-based institution owned by sovereigns that will work with, in partnership, private sector entities to generate investment flows that can meet desirable outcomes. Therefore, what we need is flagship catalysts, whether it is on the sovereign side, in the private sector side, in the philanthropic side, on the institutional side, that can at least say to the world, by COP30, at COP30, the idea of the Nature Bank has come. The advancement of the Nature Bank is a positive for civilization that we support, and that we are in the process of either, A, we are ready to support and endorse immediately, or that we are in the process of advancing discussions towards supporting immediately. And importantly, bring to the table, here is a pilot, here is a flagship project that we can start with today, to demonstrate this can work. It is not just an ideation, but a actual, real flagship project that has the potential to scaling nationally, regionally, globally. So that is what my ask would be: a few catalytic hands up. at the sovereign, private, philanthropic level to say we support at least the vision, or we are ready to be part of that movement to drive the next generation of civilization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leon. The message is clear. Resilience can be financed without surrendering sovereignty when we value nature, govern data, and align public purpose with private capital. For those in the room, governments, multilaterals, and family offices, the invitation is immediate. Bring forward country priorities, data commitments, and catalytic instruments to co-design with the Nature Bank team this week. Let's turn today's unveiling into pipelines, protections, and measurable impact by the next UNGA. With thanks to all partners, we look forward to working with you to deliver prosperity that lasts. We thank you.